What's up, everybody? It's Vince from Crushing Strength Fitness and MMA. And yeah, here's UFC 310 tonight. So it's a big event. And despite what it looked like on the outside, turned out to be a really stacked card from top to bottom. I noticed when I was taking a look at these fights, initially, I think when the event got changed around and Luque wasn't fighting Diaz anymore and Bilal wouldn't fight Shavkat, that maybe there was some discouragement in the fan base a little bit. Maybe everybody was worried that the event wouldn't be quite as good. But honestly, if you take a look at the event and you're objective about it, there's great fights on both the early prelims and the prelims, and obviously the main card is stacked as well. Now, starting from the beginning, Kennedy Nzechukwu is back again, fighting again in the heavyweight division. Since Kennedy is back in the heavyweight division again, he's riding a lot of momentum off of that Chris Barnett finish that he got a few months back. Actually, it was really recent, it feels like. I believe that fight might have been either in September or even early October. But nonetheless, he's back again in heavyweight. I'm not sure if he plans on coming back to the light heavyweight division eventually. But has a lot of potential, has a really long reach. He kind of suffers from this similar problem that Uriah Hall had, where it just seems like he's a really nice guy that maybe doesn't want to hurt people. But it seemed like in his last fight that he's breaking out of that. So it's good to see, and I'm excited to see what happens in this fight tonight. Next fight above that, Clay Guida and Chase Hooper. Honestly, I'm just surprised that Clay Guida was still fighting. I thought he had retired a year back, but he's still going at it even after all these years. Um, and Chase Hooper, it's an interesting matchup. It's hard to say how this one's going to go for sure. But it is, I guess, pretty cool to see Clay Guida still going at it, but hopefully he could eventually get a good retirement win. Next fight, Michael Chiesa and Max Griffin. Another solid fight at welterweight here. Unfortunately for both of the guys, they've kind of both been up and down and seem to be going downhill from where they started. Michael Chiesa I think he was even ranked in the top 10 at one point in welterweight, but he has since fell out of it. He's coming over that win over Tony Ferguson recently. But other than that, not a lot of great success in the welterweight division more recently. There's a chance that this fight spends most of the time on the ground. There's also a chance that maybe they'll stay on the feet too. Another hard fight to call. Next fight up, we got Chris Weidman and Eric Anders. Obviously, that was supposed to be supposed to happen in New York a few weeks ago. But Eric Anders had to pull out, and now this is a catchweight fight at 195. Um, this fight would have had a lot more hype on it if it had happened maybe in 2015, 2016, or even 2017 when Anders was coming up. Um, at that time, Anders had wins over Lyoto Machida, among others, and Chris Weidman wasn't quite out of the middleweight division yet. But unfortunately for both of them, it's kind of happening at a time where they both seem to be in the downhill portion of their careers, which is unfortunate. As for Chris Weidman, you always know that he's going to perform very well. Despite the eye pokes in his last fight, he did look really good against Bruno Silva leading up to that. And honestly, Chris Weidman always looks like he's championship level. It just seems like some little mistakes happen here and there during his fights that just cause him to lose over and over again. It's really a shame. He's unfortunately since the Luke Rockhold fight, he's been 3-6 in his past 9, and had that unsuccessful light heavyweight attempt at Dominic Reyes. It's just who knows what could happen with this fight. I believe Chris Weidman will probably get a unanimous decision win. But then again, Eric Anders has a lot of power too, and we have seen Weidman get caught. So it should be an interesting fight. Kind of unfortunate circumstances for both of them. But if there's anything the sport's taught you, is that you can't count anyone out. And even though Weidman's had a rough going, so did plenty of other guys, Jan Blachowicz, Charles Oliveira, Michael Bisping, and they still eventually came back and made it either to the top five or even winning championship gold. So we can't count them out just yet, but let's just see how this fight goes. Now, moving up to the prelims, we have Randy Brown versus Brian Battle. This is definitely a sleeper fight on this card. There's a lot riding on it. I believe whoever wins this fight will end up in the top 10 at some point soon in the welterweight division. And I just think it's going to show who's going to be the next contender in this weight class. Now, for both of these guys, they're very similar in the fact that they're both tall. They both have a long reach for the division. When it comes to styles, their styles are a little bit similar. Randy's really coming into his own with his range management, the way his powers looked, especially on his straight shots, and that performance against Muslim Salikov was just an amazing performance when it happened. And as for Brian Battle, he's just been on a lot of momentum, especially when he got that big win in France and had that awesome post-fight speech. So this is definitely an interesting fight and could be potentially close. If it goes to the ground, I would give Brown the edge. It's hard to tell though. I would say that this fight's probably going to stay mostly on the feet. And if it does, we could have a potential fight of the night, folks. So definitely keep your eye out for that one. As for a prediction, it's a really hard fight to predict because they're both similar, both riding a lot of momentum. I just think it's going to be a great fight that will set the tone for who's going to be the next contender for the welterweight division. Now moving up, we have Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. First thing with that fight, I had heard that the fight wasn't on the main card, and then I assumed, all right, well, it's not on the main card. At least it's headlining in the prelims. But then I was wrong about that too. This fight's not even close to headlining the prelims. It's the second fight that comes on after Brown versus Battle. Just very strange that a former champion in Sterling doesn't get a main card attention, especially against an undefeated prospect like Evloev, who is 18-0. As for this fight, I don't know if it'll be as boring as people expect it to be. Evloev, when the fight does stay on the feet, he has pretty decent movement. Pretty good hand skills too. But I think Arnold Allen outstruck him in that fight that happened recently. That was his most recent win, I believe. As for Sterling, he's shown that if he doesn't box too much, if he uses his kicks, that his striking could be really formidable too. Because the grappling is going to be nullified, I think Sterling is a much better grappler than Evloev is. I do think that Sterling will potentially win a unanimous decision tonight too, and probably get the next featherweight title shot after presumably Volkanovski if they're still interested in that, and Diego Lopez, and then likely Sterling would get the shot too, or Evloev. Either guy that wins will probably get the title shot in the near future. My bet would be on Sterling though. Moving up on the card, we have the little prelim headliner, Dominic Reyes and Anthony Smith. An honorable mention is, of course, Vicente Luque and Temba Garimbo. Luque has had a rough going these past few fights, especially against Joaquin Buckley, the first time he was finished. Garimbo's been riding a lot of momentum, but we haven't really seen him tested against a high-ranked opponent yet. So it's probably just a fight that we'll have to wait and see what happens. I know I'm definitely not making a pick on that fight. As for Reyes and Smith, I think that Reyes beating Dustin Jacoby, I think is going to give him the momentum he needs to rise back to the top in that division. And I honestly think that this win against Smith will be pretty dominant. And I think that Reyes having that rough going, losing the close fight to John Jones, and then losing against Blachowicz and Prohaska both by knockout, I think he just needed more time, especially I don't know if any of you have saw the story of him having that blood clot in his calf. I just think he needed more time, and probably could have taken 2 years after the Prohaska fight because those were some bad knockouts that he sustained there. But he came in anyway, in I believe 2022, and got knocked out by Ryan Spann with a jab. And when you see a fighter who previously took a lot of damage get knocked down from jabs, it's a pretty bad sign for where their durability is at. But he took the time he needed to, came back against Jacoby, won a pretty dominant knockout in the first round, and I just think Reyes is back. We've seen plenty of guys have rough loss streaks and then come back. I think he's going to be one of those guys. And as for Anthony Smith, he's taken a lot of short notice fights against Roundtree, against Roman Dolidze. But I think the Roman Dolidze loss, I would say, kind of puts the nail in whether or not Smith would get to the top five again, unfortunately. Um, he's shown a lot of great skills, especially when he fought um, the Australian up and comer a few years back. And but ever since fights like that, whenever there's a big fight like against Alexander Rakic or some of the guys like that, it just seems like he doesn't have what it takes to really maintain his top position there. Um, and then it doesn't help the fact that he takes a lot of short notice fights, doesn't get a lot of time to rest, train, regroup. But who knows? Anthony has pulled off the unexpected before, like when he beat Gustafson all those years ago. He's not a guy you could count out either, but I do believe this is going to be a fairly straightforward win for Dominic Reyes. Now moving up on the card, all the way to the main card, we have Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie. Now this fight, Gracie's strong suit is definitely his ground game. I don't know how much he's improved his striking since the Swanson loss and everything. We know that he's durable, at least off of that fight. But other than that, not great striking shown at all. And while Bryce Mitchell is predominantly a grappler, but does have some pretty good striking himself. With that, I think Mitchell's just going to stop the takedowns um, and just outstrike Kron Gracie to a fairly straightforward decision win. Now moving on, we have Cyril Gane and Alexander Volkov too. The rematch, um, it's hard to say. Gane's had a rough few losses. He lost to John Jones, lost to Francis Ngannou. Those were the two big champions in that division. Now he's fighting Volkov, and Volkov's been on a pretty good momentum recently, especially the way he looked against Sergey Pavlovich. I don't know if I can make a call on this fight. It depends on how much work Cyril Gane has done since the losses to Jones and everybody. And then Ngannou. It depends on what work he's been able to accomplish in the gym, if he improved his grappling. If not, then it's hard to say. Volkov has made a lot of improvements. He's managing his distance better. He's not getting hit with shots in close range like he was against Derek Lewis. Just seems to be doing a lot better. And the Pavlovich win is such a big win for that division. So I won't make a call, but who knows, everybody? We could potentially be seeing another rising contender in Alexander Volkov. Now, moving up to the co-main event, this is a huge fight, and what a lot of people would argue is the people's main event. Shavkat Rachmanov and Ian Gary, and this is just a textbook matchup. We haven't seen this in a long time. We rarely ever see this period. We sort of saw it with John Jones and Daniel Cormier, where you could argue John Jones was undefeated going in, and so was Cormier. We saw it in Rashad Evans versus Lyoto Machida many years ago. But for the first time in a long time, we are seeing two undefeated top contenders fight for the number one contender spot in the division. So Shavkat is 18-0, Ian Gary is 15-0. Um, Both have had a pretty steady rise to the top. I just think that Rachmanov's pressure, his ability to grapple, is just going to be the deciding factor here. And I even think he could finish Gary. I do think Gary could probably take a shot just based off of some of the shots, the few shots he took against Jeff Neal. And at the end of the day, if you're a great defensive fighter and you don't get hit a lot, the higher probability that your chin still could take good damage just because you haven't been hit a lot. So maybe Rachmanov will get a finish on the ground or maybe by decision. If not that, then maybe by decision. It should be an interesting fight. I do think it'll be back and forth. I don't think it'll be particularly close, but I do think Gary's definitely going to have his moments too. And moving up to the main event, we have Alexandre Pantoja and Kai Asakura. This is a hard fight to call just because I haven't seen a lot of Asakura's fights. And Pantoja, we've seen, has a lot of heart, a lot of will, a lot of grit, that championship level grit to beat everybody that they put against him. So it's really hard to say. I'm more inclined to think Pantoja will win this fight. And, there's a lot of other factors that go in. And I believe Chael Sonnen's right when he said that Asakura is the first fighter to debut with a title shot win. I had previously thought that there was another fighter that debuted with a title shot, but I actually don't think we've seen it because he had a good point. Dan Henderson had already fought in the UFC prior to getting the shot against Rampage and Silva, and other fights too. Other than Dan Henderson, even Anderson Silva too. Sometimes the fact that his win over Rich Franklin, which started his dominant reign, sometimes overshadows his debut win. He had a debut win too before fighting Rich. The interesting thing with Silva is he was able to get a title shot off of one win, but I digress. I do believe this is the first time we're seeing a fighter debut with a title shot. So, the bright lights, I know that he fought in another promotion and there were plenty of fans there too. But I just think that there's something different about the UFC lights, the fans, that kind of energy. He hasn't looked to have a lot of pressure so far. He just looks happy to be there, which I would too. If you could get into the UFC and just get his title shot off the bat. Um, Other than that, I just think it's a different, it's almost like a different sport. It's just the octagon, seeing the commentators. I just think that it's hard to come in at the UFC championship level, never fighting at the UFC before, and just beat the champion. It's a very difficult thing to do. So I'm more inclined to pick Pantoja, but just because we haven't seen Asakura a lot, it's hard to make an official call. So yeah, that's UFC 310, everybody. Hopefully everybody tunes into it. Let me know what you think in the comments of the predictions and what you think is going to happen tonight, and if you have any underdog wins that you want to shout out. So if you could leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, see you later.